So these yellow lines represent the Litecoin halvings. If Bitcoin goes to 100K in 5 years, then I suspect that you could see Litecoin.
Today I interview Quant Analyst Benjamin Cowen and look at the data to get a Litecoin price prediction into the halving. Hit the like button if you appreciate this content. And before we look at the charts, Benjamin, what are your general thoughts on Litecoin?
So in general, I mean, I suspect that Litecoin USD over like 5, 10, 15 years can trend higher as just more money is printed. But as a long-term investment, it tends to not do that well, mainly because of the opportunity cost of like its Bitcoin valuation and even its Ether valuation, right? So typically you see the blue chips outperform Litecoin. So I would argue that it's more so short term. It's a short term play at certain points in the market cycle.
Nonetheless, I totally agree with you that, well, Litecoin's value proposition is it's 4 times faster, 4 times cheaper. They also have the Mimblewimble implementation. Right now, we're seeing institutions and more people care about Bitcoin because Bitcoin is more censorship resistant. It's more decentralized, which is the better trade-off, I guess, in the market's opinion, versus faster and cheaper. Nonetheless, halving is coming up and Litecoin is putting in new highs against USD. Let's look historically at some of the charts and try and get a prediction for this halving.
Yeah. So can you see my screen okay?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so I've been tracking this for a while. I've actually had this chart up for probably about 6 months now. And the reason is because normally what we see Litecoin do is rally in the first half of its halving year. So these yellow lines represent the Litecoin halvings. And what you'll notice is that it tends to rally but then fade going into the halving. So like, for instance, we've had 2 prior halvings. We had one in 2015. And by the way, they've all taken place in August. So you had one in August of 2015. Litecoin topped out the week of July 6th. So you'll notice here it topped out basically about a month or two before its halving. Same idea here in 2019. You can see that it topped out in June, just a month or two before the halving as well. And so I've sort of been of the opinion that most altcoins, as you know, that my opinion is that they bleed against Bitcoin, but Litecoin is one of those ones where at least in its halving year, for the first half of the year, it can do better than it normally does, right? So like then because a lot of times Litecoin just bleeds like a lot against basically the blue chips like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but during its halving year, as you can see, right, there are some bullish phases for Litecoin, and I think we've just been in that same type of thing. The thing that I would look for would be if it puts in some type of a blow off top wick type thing. Like you can see that happened in 2015, it happened in 2019 as well, and again, it happened in the summertime, right, 1 or 2 months before the halving in August. And right now, the halving is actually, I think I might need to shift this forward because I think the halving might actually occur closer to the first week of August. We'll have to see. Of course, it's just a projection. But what I would be looking for is does this fade going into the halving? Because if it does, then it very well could just be playing out like it historically has. And one of the things I think about Litecoin, and that's why when you look at it, it's more of a short term trade, right? Because what you'll see is that after the halving comes and goes, Litecoin kind of cools off for a while. Like it doesn't mean that it goes to zero, but it cools off for a while, and then it normally doesn't really start to make another big move until 12 to 18 months after it's halving. And the reason I would argue that it's not a great long-term investment is because, well, look at the Litecoin Bitcoin chart. I mean, this chart is pretty clear the direction it's going, and like it's not to say that it doesn't occasionally pop up, but if you measure it from 2013, the Litecoin Bitcoin valuation is down 93%. I mean, that just shows you that like just holding Bitcoin would have been so much better than holding Litecoin. And it's not even just Bitcoin, right? I mean, look at the Litecoin Ether valuation. Same idea. I mean, since what, the last 4 years, if you take it back to say 2019, let's say summer of 2019, so 4 years ago, we know crypto is very cyclical. Litecoin is down against Ethereum about 90%. And, some people might look at this and say, well, is it starting to trend back the other way? You could argue that, but again, even over here, it looked like it was trending back the other way. And it was about right before its halving that it finally topped out and then entered into a much longer downtrend. So My general opinion on Litecoin is that it's great for some short-term plays if people want to take them, especially in the halving year. But long-term, it does tend to bleed against Bitcoin and Ethereum.
And let's define for the audience why we see an uptick into the halving. And plain and simple is, imagine if you make money, if you make a standard salary, but in 2 months, 6 months, whenever it is, that salary is going to be cut in half. But you can do more work to get more salary up until that cutoff. Essentially, the Litecoin miners know, damn, our payouts get cut in half at that halving. So while it's profitable and price is going up in anticipation, we better squeeze the most profits out of this juice because many of them will probably switch over to Bitcoin and ride that halving into the next year.
Right, that's the thing. The narrative is constantly changing. Right, we ride one narrative for a few months, then we switch over to another narrative. By the way, another narrative, in addition to the halving, could be people speculating about whether it's a security or not. Like maybe people are speculating on it not being a security like Bitcoin, whereas other ones are more obviously securities, or at least the SEC is more so obviously calling them securities. Whether they win that fight remains to be seen, but that could also be another narrative that has pushed Litecoin up recently. But again, I mean, I still think you have to be careful. And it's N equals 2, right? We have 2 data points here. It's not like you take it to the bank and say that it definitely has to happen again. But I remember back in 2019 seeing that same thing play out, and in 2015 seeing it rally into the halving, but just before you get to the halving, it kind of fades, and then money goes elsewhere into the new narrative.
And let's talk about price prediction, because I can feel a lot of people may be thinking, okay, should I buy Litecoin now or is it too late? I mean, looking at this, I would say it's too late. The best time was multiple months ago. But based on history, based on the metrics, what's a price prediction you have based on the data?
Over what time frame, I guess?
I guess when you think the halving happens, around what range do we top off?
Wow.
Or maybe go off of like X's from the bottom to past halvings and then compare it to where we are now, even though it is sort of diminishing returns.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'm not super convinced of it going to any specific. I mean, you can kind of see that it's maybe been in this channel for a while. I'm not gonna throw out any crazy price predictions because I don't really think it'll go on any crazy run anytime soon. I mean, it could continue to go up. If you look at where it went in 2019, it went basically to $140 before it really topped out. But also note that it had collapsed from Q3. It collapsed, basically 50% before taking that move there. One interesting thing that I was looking at is if you take like sort of a move here from this collapse down to the lows, and then you copy that from that collapse point, that actually sort of marked the high, right, in 2019, right? Like it sort of just collapsed, double the drop. So it dropped, it sort of retraced the drop and then doubled up on that, and that marked the high. So, I mean, if you were to do something similar, I don't know where you really take it from, but let's say you take it from sort of this drop here in May of 2022 all the way down. If you were to copy that over and just say, well, what if it goes up about twice that? I mean, yeah, it could put you at a very similar valuation. But I would say that it is very risky to continue to chase it at this point, especially considering that it normally tops out in June or July. I mean, that's what we've seen. And look, that's not to say that it can't go higher. And it's not to say that if it does top out, it's not to say that it can't go higher next year. I mean, in fact, normally it just sort of cools off after the halving. It doesn't like go to zero. It just cools off for a while. And then sometime, in the next 12 months or 18 months, then it takes off in theoretically going to new all-time highs. So I would say that this move is not likely a move to be to new all-time highs. Perhaps it fades into the halving, and then sometime like 2024, 2025, it goes to new highs.
So price prediction range wise, around 140 or around basically where we are now. We've already
I would say where we are now up to 140. I don't, I'm not saying it's going to go to 140 because it might not. I mean, the collapse over here certainly wasn't as aggressive, so maybe the climb won't be as aggressive either. But I think the point is chasing it can be very risky, right? Especially knowing that it's normally around June or July where it tops out.
And go into that a little more because there's a lot of, I want you to talk directly to the Litecoin holders. Best advice if somebody has a big bag of Litecoin and believes in it fundamentally for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean the best advice if you believe in it fundamentally is to remember that I mean whatever you might be worried about tomorrow, it normally comes and goes, right? So like even if let's say the idea of it fading into the halving is right, that doesn't mean that it fades forever, right? I mean it could just mean that you watch it go down for 3 or 6 months and then it takes back off sometime next year or the year after that. I mean, normally what you see in these cycles are just sort of some hype into the halving and then a cool off period. So if you really believe in the Litecoin tech, it would be this sort of cool off period after the halving that might actually create opportunity for you, right? I mean, like if you really believe in it, right? Which I mean, again, like you can go to the Litecoin Bitcoin valuation and take a look at that. But if you really want to pick up a bag, then I imagine sort of the post halving fade that we normally get would probably be considered as an opportunity by many.
Final question, Ben, just for fun. Price prediction for Litecoin in 5 years, or maybe by next halving. If Bitcoin if Bitcoin ends up going over $100,000, where do you see Litecoin?
Um, so it's interesting because Litecoin. I mean, I think the intrinsic or the sort of the knee jerk reaction is to say, well, if Bitcoin goes here, then that means the altcoin has to go up a lot, right? We do know that in 2017, Bitcoin hit 20K, and then in 2021, Bitcoin hit like almost 70K, whereas Litecoin basically just did a double top, like, and I mean, like, it's sort of one of those inconvenient truths, right? Like if it, like, why didn't Litecoin go up a lot more than what, than what Bitcoin did? So like, I mean, if Bitcoin goes to 100K, then I would suspect Litecoin could put in new highs. That doesn't mean that they have to be like 3x or 5x the prior highs, right? Like it could just be a marginal improvement on it like it was last time, or it could be a more substantial improvement like it was from back over here. So if you take the move from 2013 peak to this peak, it was a 5 or 600% move. But this peak to this one was only like an 18% move. So I mean, I guess best case scenario would be, man, you're gonna make this the title of the video, aren't you? Um,
You first off, you know us too well, but second off, I won't. I'll make the title about the halving in this
okay.
case because that's the
Um, Yeah. Yeah. So maybe like, okay. So I'll say like this: if Bitcoin goes to 100K in 5 years, then I suspect that you could see Litecoin in the 500 to $1,000 range. I think that would be a fair statement. But if Bitcoin doesn't go to 100K, then you're likely nowhere near that for Litecoin, and you could be quite a bit lower. And if Litecoin does go to $500 within, say, 5 years, I still think you're probably going to see this cool off period, after the halving, right? Where that is sort of like the window into placing your bets as to what it will actually achieve in the next cycle.
Ben. I want to have you on in 3 to 4 months. We're going to revisit some of these charts. Maybe we'll be at that cool down. But thank you so much for joining me. Where can my audience find you?
Yeah, so just check out my YouTube channel, is Benjamin Cowen, and I'm also on Twitter at Into Cryptoverse.
Be sure to click subscribe. We drop a video every single day, keeping you informed about crypto.